Welcome to On Record PR, where we go on record with industry leaders to discuss best practices for public relations strategies that drive business success. Let's get started with the show.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gina Vrubel, host of On Record PR. In this episode, we're going on record with Elise Holtzman. Elise is a former practicing attorney, certified executive coach, and the founder of The Lawyer's Edge. She has worked with law firms to grow thriving businesses by helping lawyers become better business developers and leaders for the past 12 years. After graduating from Columbia Law School, she practiced in 2 large law firms in New York City. In addition to providing consulting, training, and coaching for her clients, Elise speaks frequently for legal organizations such as the New Jersey State Bar Association, the American Bar Association Women Rainmakers, and the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity. She also writes about business development for publications such as the New York Law Journal and Law 360. Elise recently launched a new podcast, The Lawyer's Edge, to bring practical messages of growth and transformation to the legal community. Welcome, Elise.
Thanks so much, Gina. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
I'm so happy to have you here. And I have to say thank you to you, too, for having me on your show, The Lawyer's Edge. You and I have known each other for quite a few years, and we're both what we call transitioned lawyers.
Yes.
Doing something different than the typical practice of law. And so we have so much in common. I'm curious, what made you decide to pivot from practicing law to training, coaching, and consulting for lawyers?
So it's not necessarily a straight path. I started practicing law at big law firms in Manhattan, and I was practicing in the area of commercial real estate transactions, which I absolutely loved. I had no intention of ever doing anything else, but over time, the lifestyle required of a big law attorney started to get to me. First of all, I married another big law lawyer, so we both had crazy schedules. I remember clocking a 2,600 hour or plus billable year and wanting to be able to practice law, but also have a life. And then we wound up having our first child, and I went back to work part-time, which was 40 hours a week for 80% of my salary. And it sounded sort of rational based on what is expected of lawyers in big law, but I wound up working more like 6 or 7 days a week and billing much longer hours for that same 80% of my salary because I was the most senior associate in my group and I was running hundreds of millions of dollars of deals. So not having coaches, there were no coaches back then, at least not that I'm aware of, not really feeling that I had mentors, and nobody had ever mentioned the word sponsor back then. I thought, well, I've tried this thing and it really doesn't work. And so, I said at the time that I was committing career suicide, but it was going to be great for our family's life. And I did that. I actually wound up being home with my kids for a number of years, which I can promise you I didn't expect to do. My kids sometimes joke, Mom was born in a suit carrying a briefcase, and yet there I was, being a stay-at-home mom. So I say that it really wasn't my choice in some ways. And yet at the same time, it was a choice that I was able to make because, I know that many, many families can't afford to have one person staying at home. So ultimately, it was great. I was grateful that I was able to do it. But at some point, I decided it was time to get back to work. And again, I just had this mindset that I can't make it work with a family. We didn't have family around. And so, I needed to be able to hold down the fort a little bit. And I read a book called The Success Principles by Jack Canfield. And Jack Canfield is one of the authors of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. Mm-hmm. And so that series, I really haven't read much of that series. I know it's very popular, but in the Success Principles, I found out about this thing called coaching, executive coaching and leadership coaching. And it was almost like the light bulb went on for me that was something, I had majored in psychology undergrad, and that this was a way that I could use my talents and love what I did at the same time. So I wound up doing a full year certificate program in coaching about 13 years ago and launched my practice, not entirely knowing what I was going to do with it, but knowing that in some way I was going to serve lawyers. And, I haven't looked back since. I've loved every minute of it.
Well, and I've known you all of those years, and we've recently, and a few years ago, were able to get reacquainted. And I know that you've made that very successful and made it look very easy. However, I'm sure it wasn't. Being an entrepreneur myself, I know that it's not easy. but you've certainly made it look so. In what way do lawyers and law firms need to change to be more successful? What are you seeing as one who coaches and sits down and directs them?
What most people notice who work with lawyers and law firms, and I think many lawyers know for themselves, is that the skills that we learn in law school are not the skills we come to need necessarily when we are running law firms or practice groups. So, I like to say they gave us two things in law school. They gave us a foundation in the law. And, so we took constitutional law and torts and contracts and all that good stuff. And then they taught us how to think like a lawyer. So you can never think like a normal person again, which is true.
I say brainwash.
Yeah, we were brainwashed. And then they just expected everyone to go be successful. Like, congratulations, you're a lawyer. Now go do good stuff. So we weren't prepared for the everyday practice of law. And first of all, I never got training on how to run a case or how to run a transaction. So we're expected to learn those things almost as an apprentice, the old-fashioned apprentice learning at the knee of the partner who knows what he or she is doing. But there's so much more to practice than that. And so we come to find out that we need to do things like manage other people, manage up, manage down, keep clients happy, start law firms, hire and fire employees, make sure people are getting paid, market our law firms so that we can actually have clients, engage in business development so that we can develop relationships with other people and bring in business. So, there's always been this kind of country club mentality about the law that somehow, this is a profession and that we're above all of this stuff about sales and management and all of those sorts of things. But anybody who is in leadership at a law firm or has a small firm will tell you that these things are absolutely critical. And so I think that when I first started my practice 12 years ago, there were not that many people doing what I'm doing. There were not that many people who had left the law and were working as coaches and consultants for law firms. There has been an explosion over the past few years of people doing that, which I think is great, right? Because there's a recognition in the legal community that there is a need to have people who are willing to come in and help lawyers be better business leaders.
I couldn't agree more. Do you only work with lawyers?
I do. I work with lawyers exclusively and with law firms. Every now and then, someone comes along and says, hey, I know you do this, but are you willing to work with me on that? And so, as an example, I recently worked with someone who is herself a recovering attorney and is starting her own firm doing something completely different. And because she really wanted to, build a small firm and engage in business development, and that's why she was coming for me, I'm able to work with her. But for the most part, I work entirely with lawyers.
That's great to know. So you have written about the importance of law firms intentionally creating a business development culture. What is an intentional business development culture and why is that important?
If you think about a law firm with, the partners at the top, some of whom are really good at making the phone ring and historically have done that, and then the people coming up the pike, you often have those people at the top, and then you have people coming up the pike who do not know how to develop business, are not asked to develop business, are not taught the skills to develop business. And in fact, in many larger law firms, mid-sized to large law firms, are expressly dissuaded from developing business because the idea is you're fairly young, you've got to learn the law, and you need to bill the hours. That's why we hired you. So churn out the hours, become a really good lawyer. And you know what? We're not even going to mention business development to you. We'll worry about that later. So while that may seem rational, and certainly young lawyers need to learn how to become exceptional lawyers and, need to know the ethics of the situation, how to handle, whatever technical legal issue comes along. Ultimately, a law firm is a business. And you need people coming along who are going to be able to develop that business. So what often happens is somebody picks their head up from, a brief on their desk at 8 years or 10 years out. And they say, wow, I've been here a really long time doing a great job. I'd really like to make partner at this firm. And the firm says, yeah, we think you're great. Where's your business? I'm sorry, excuse me? What do you mean, where's my business? Right? Yeah, well, you need to have business in order to be a partner at this firm. Well, I don't know anything about that. And in fact, all the people that I used to have connections with, I've sort of lost along the way because I've been so busy working. So what I say is that, and by the way, what winds up happening is, and I've seen this with several firms, in the second generation of this firm. So imagine a firm that starts up with some partners who leave big law, where they decide to come together and create a law firm. And let's say for our sake, they started it in the 80s. Okay. So we're here in 2020. They started in the 80s and they just know how to make the phone ring. They have their experiences, they have their network, and they do really well. The next generation of lawyers who they may have hired for pedigree or for their skills aren't developing business. All of a sudden, those people who started the firm are starting to retire. They're starting to slow down. They're not bringing in as much business as they were before. Maybe their contacts have retired. And the firm is actually at risk because you don't have this second generation of business developers and leaders. And so building a business development culture, to get finally back to your question, is first of all, understanding that you have a business development culture. Whether you're intentionally creating one or not, you have a business development culture. If someone said to an associate or a junior partner, what's the business development culture at your firm? Many of them would say, what business development culture? Most people aren't doing it. There are several rainmakers in the firm. All of the rest of us are doing their work. I don't necessarily have job security as a result of that. And so being intentional about it gives you the opportunity to shift your business development culture to something that empowers everyone inside the firm to contribute to the future of the firm and the bottom line of the firm. And so there are a number of different ways to do that. But if you want your firm to live and to grow, and if you want to retain your top talent, it's very important to be intentional about creating a business development culture that supports people in learning how to do it and in making it happen.
That is a great answer. And, it's interesting because I can't tell you how many times I've walked into, especially the smaller firms, where they have grown, two lawyers, two lawyers, two lawyers. They have all these different practice areas. I tend to call them hotels for lawyers. They don't have a practice management system. They don't know how they do conflict checks. It's just like this hodgepodge of a lot of things. And when you ask them those questions, it's fascinating that they don't understand the importance of training and creating a culture for the younger attorneys because they are the future of the business. And, my dad was a lawyer. When he graduated in 1971, there were a very low number of people in his class. There were two women and one African American. When I graduated Widener, we had 50% women. We had great diversity. The pool has changed. So where you might have had a sliver of the piece of pie, now you have a sliver of a sliver of a sliver.
Yeah, there are a lot of lawyers in this country, right? So there are 1.3 million lawyers in this country. And, it's a competitive business. And it is a business. That's the other thing is that, way back when, there used to be I'm dating myself here, but there used to be an Oldsmobile commercial. They would show an Oldsmobile driving across the screen and this deep voice would intone, "This is not your father's Oldsmobile," right? They were trying to sell it to the younger generation. And the legal profession, is not your father's or grandfather's legal profession anymore. It's not just this situation where, somebody hires you when you're 27 years old and they're still working with you when you're 75 years old. It's a much more competitive business. And it is, in fact, a business, which I think is one of the things that many lawyers ultimately find somewhat shocking. And so, I do think it's important and also to recognize that you're talking a little bit about culture generally, right? How do we, instead of being a bunch of lawyers in a firm who aren't really a cohesive team, how do we create a cohesive team of people who work together really well, want to stay together, serve clients incredibly well, et cetera? Having a business development culture is part of that larger culture. But one of the reasons I think it's so important to think about it and perhaps to start with business development culture is that people can wrap their heads around that in a law firm. Yes, we need to develop business and we can develop a business development culture and wrap other things around that rather than this idea of culture generally, which sounds a little woo-woo sometimes, I think, to people. So I think developing or creating or fostering a business development culture can be the starting point for really having a cohesive firm that is going to survive well into the future.
That's interesting because I remember back when they taught us in law school that the word sale was a four-letter word. And it seems that in the legal culture, there still is a trepidation to embrace the idea of the sale. Every lawyer's, I don't sell my services, but isn't that what business development is? Can you tell me a little bit more about thoughts on helping lawyers navigate around that archaic way of thinking?
It is very uncomfortable for many lawyers to think about sales, right? We equate that with the proverbial used car salesman, kind of with the loud, jacket and the chains around his neck, trying to, sell you something that isn't necessarily valuable. And again, to go back to this idea of us being a profession rather than a business, people get uncomfortable with that. And we're a self-selected group. I don't know many people who went to law school because they wanted to become salespeople, or they went to law school because they were risk takers. And so what happens is you've got this self-selected group that just wants to be recognized for the good work they do. Many people are the smartest person in the room. They're really good at what they do. And they say, well, I do good work, right? That should be enough. And listen, I would love that to be enough. In a perfect world, it would be enough. Your reputation would precede you, and people would come and find you simply because you're you and you're so fabulous at what you do. But that's not the world anymore. First of all, we're living in a global marketplace. There's so many cross-border transactions, cross-state lines transactions, relationships all over the world. People are not necessarily staying with the same law firm forever, and they're not necessarily even going to the same law firm for all of their work. So there is a competitive element to this. If you're thinking that the word sales is ugly and you don't want to be considered a salesperson, what I would say is shift your mindset a little bit. And let's talk instead about being helpful to other people and developing relationships. So when you, in a very, ethical, tasteful way, let other people know what it is you do and how you can serve them and help them get what they need or avoid something that they want to avoid, that's sales, but it's not salesy. And that's the kind of work that I do with my clients at the law firm level and on an individual level, is helping them understand how to talk to people about, what it is I do and whom I serve and how I can be helpful to you, if I can be helpful, by the way. You can't be helpful to everybody. That's a whole other topic. But if you can be helpful, how you can do that. And, you can also serve as a resource for people and say, listen, let's just talk this through. If there's a way that I can be helpful to you, I'll let you know that. And if not, I'm going to help you find the right lawyer. And, you grow your relationships that way as well, of course, through referrals. There's a lot of goodwill that comes out of that, as well as a lot of referrals coming back to you.
Which makes so much sense. And as one who works in marketing and public relations, the end result is always about client retention and acquisition. And it's great to know that you're there to help the individual attorneys with their individual attorney marketing plans, with their client development plans, whether it's nurturing or bringing them on, or just helping people find where they need to be.
I would also say, just to piggyback on something you said, you mentioned, the client relationship and the client retention, and that's critical. I also touched briefly on the idea of retaining your people. And it's very expensive for a firm to lose its people, for any firm to lose its people. And there are all sorts of costs that are built into that, hard costs as well as softer costs in terms of lost time and productivity and everything else. In order to retain your talent, I think it's important to develop these sorts of cultures internally, but also to ensure that people feel that you're investing in them. So what I have noticed is that when firms train their people, educate their people, support their people in engaging in business development or leadership development or whatever it may be, that the folks that they're talking to definitely become more loyal and they want to stick around because somebody's actually paying attention to them. It's not like just come into this law firm and grind out the work. And particularly for the millennial generation, which, a lot of people complain about. I don't happen to agree with most of those folks. They're very, very hardworking, but they also want to develop and they want to have those ties with people. They want to be part of the conversation. And so, investing time and energy, and yes, sometimes money in your people, I think is very important for keeping your firm, growing and thriving.
I couldn't agree more. being the owner of a company, it is very expensive, and it should be your people first. And that's something that a lot of law firms, I believe, are starting to embrace today and starting to really understand. So as we come to the end of 2020, the world has changed. We've been through a year of pandemic, and something we thought was going to be 2 weeks has been countless months. And we really aren't clear how long we will be faced with some of these health issues. What should lawyers be doing and not doing in situations where they can't meet in person?
There's a lot of talk about that among lawyers and law firms. And so, what I would say is, as devastating as this crisis has been on so many levels, right? Of course, the health level and losing people in our communities and that sort of thing. I think that it has been and continues to be a tremendous opportunity to build relationships. Whereas I had people at the beginning of the pandemic say to me, "Oh, I'm just going to stop worrying about business development right now. I'll wait till this is over because I can't go out to lunch with people," that sort of thing. And so recognize that, and many people are doing this already, but recognize that you can continue to do two things: nurture your existing network and grow your network, right? So I always talk about two things when it comes to your network. One is nurturing. Don't forget about the people in your network. Keep in touch with them, find out how they're doing, connect with them on a fairly regular basis. And you're going to choose some to connect with more frequently than others. And then grow your network. And I can see people saying, "Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? In a pandemic, we're all shut down. How am I supposed to grow my network? That's utterly ridiculous." There are so many ways that you can both nurture and grow your network in today's world. And obviously that involves just checking in with people, picking up the phone and calling if you're over a certain age. If you're under a certain age, picking up the phone and calling is apparently quote unquote weird, but that's fine. Connect with people in whatever, using whatever channels you have. Get in front of them, get on a Zoom call with them, have a happy hour, find out how they're doing. It doesn't have to be business related. Dig into the personal. And I don't mean, start asking people super personal questions, but remember that we're all people before we're lawyers. We're all people before we're business developers or clients. As far as growing your network goes, I've actually grown my network dramatically throughout this pandemic, in part because I've done a bunch of webinars. I've attended a bunch of webinars. I've reached out to people on LinkedIn and just said, "Hey, I thought your article was really interesting. If you'd ever like to have a conversation, I'd love to talk to you." Most people that I've reached out to have said yes, because I'm not spamming anybody. I'm not reaching out for no reason. I'm not selling to them. I'm just looking to grow my network and meet interesting people and see how I can be helpful to them. And I think people are really open to that because I think many people are feeling very isolated. And so there really is an opportunity here that hopefully will continue. I mean, I think that, having to go out to lunch with someone or having to go somewhere, in a snowstorm to get to an evening event on a Thursday night when you've got a million other things going on is potentially worthwhile, but can also be difficult. And so now we have different opportunities. We're learning to do different things. And I hope we'll continue doing those things. But what I would say is don't just throw in the towel because there's a crisis going on in the world. Use this as an opportunity to connect on a human level with other people. Some of it will turn into business. Some of it won't. Some of it will turn into relationships. Some of it was just a nice conversation. But, look at it as an opportunity instead of looking at it as just like, I've got to sit around and wait for, another year to go by.
Elise, I couldn't agree more. My network has grown exponentially during the pandemic. And what's interesting, though, is because I was a working mom, I really limited what I did in person when my children were young. So I really took advantage of things like LinkedIn and conferences and anything online and webinars and things like that. And I've been personally just been saying that for years. So it's great to see. I think the lawyers have adopted technology at an exponential rate in 2020 than they have in previous years. And yet I still had a lawyer say to me the other day when she asked me, how can I be networking? And I mentioned LinkedIn and she said, I don't use LinkedIn. So, okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are people who are very behind on that. And, when you're a lawyer, if you are looking to use social media for for networking, LinkedIn is the place to be for the most part. There are some law practices that may benefit from being on Facebook, but everyone will benefit from being on LinkedIn. And, I've said this before and I'll say it again. If you're just using LinkedIn as a big Rolodex, and here I go dating myself again, but if you're just using it as a place to store your contacts, and by the way, it's great for that. If you're looking for someone, you can dive right into LinkedIn and find them. But LinkedIn is intended to be an active networking platform for professionals. So use it for what it's used for. For what it's intended for. Don't just sort of, hang out there occasionally or not show up. I've met some absolutely fabulous and fascinating people on LinkedIn.
I love that you said that. And, I'm going to share something with you that I haven't told anybody. I just shredded 30 years of business cards. So
how did that feel? I love that.
It felt great. During the early days of the pandemic, how we were all cleaning out our closets and our drawers and, all of that stuff. I had 30 years. I had an entire desk drawer, a file cabinet drawer filled with business cards. Please tell me why.
Right. They were doing absolutely nothing for you. You could have wallpapered a new bathroom with them.
I really could have. And so I finally got rid of them all. And LinkedIn is what we used to call a Rolodex. And I'm not sure we're even going to go back to using business cards. So who knows? But with all of that said, I ask every one of our guests for a recommendation of a book, either for business or personal inspiration. Do you have one or two to share with us?
So I read a lot of nonfiction books. My kids make fun of me, like, Mom, are you ever going to read a fiction book again? It happens occasionally. And thanks to the women lawyers I know who recently invited me to be part of a book club, I'm finally reading some fiction again. One of the books that I've read very recently is called Transitions: Making Sense of Life's Changes by William Bridges. And I raise it now because we're all going through transition. No matter who you are and where you are on the planet, I think each one of us is going through transitions. And as you know, there are a lot of challenges for people. There are challenges of space and educating children and not being able to go to work and not being able to find a quiet place to do work. There are health issues. And I think there are a lot of mental health challenges going on right now for people. I think a lot more anxiety and depression are coming up. So I like this book because one of the things that Bill Bridges talks about in his book is the idea that every new beginning starts with an ending. And we kind of don't take the time to realize that we're actually ending something. So for all of us right now, we're ending working the way we've always worked and taking the time to almost mourn that a little bit and to stay in that space and to learn how to be okay with it before we go into the new beginning is really important. And there's actually an in-between space where some improvement and innovation and excitement starts to happen, and then you can go forward. So, I like this book because I think a lot of people are saying, well, this is the new normal. We've got to get used to it. And that may be the case. I hope it's not the new normal forever and that we come to something that looks a lot more like what we used to have. But I think that it's too much of a, rip the Band-Aid off kind of a situation where he gives really good advice for going through something like this. And it could be any transition that you're going through in life, even a happy one, having a baby or getting married or, having a grandchild or whatever it might be. There is a process that he suggests for transitions that I think is a powerful one. And I think helps people make that shift and do it, in a happier, less stressed sort of way.
Well, that sounds like a fabulous book, and I'm so glad you shared that with us. Elise, I'm thrilled you can join me today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure that our listeners have as well. Where can they learn more about you or how to get in touch?
Thanks, Gina. I've loved being here with you today, as always. They can just reach out to me at Elise, it's ELIS as in Sam, at thelawyersedge.com, or just go to my website, thelawyersedge.com, and I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn, so you can find me there as well.
I'm so glad you can join us. Have a great day.
You too, Gina. Thanks.
This episode is sponsored by Furrier-Rubel Communications. Recognized as the #1 agency by the National Law Journal, Furrier-Rubel helps top businesses and law firms with high-stakes public relations and marketing, reputation management, crisis planning, and incident response. Furrier-Rubel also supports law firms and their clients with high-profile litigation, media strategy, and training. To learn more, go to furiarubel.com or email podcast@onrecordpr.com. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider rating us on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to On Record PR at Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, or Apple.
Thank you for listening to On Record PR. Visit our website, onrecordpr.com, to subscribe to the show, share it with your friends on social media, find show notes, additional episodes, and more information. We'll see you next time. In the meantime, feel free to send us questions or show ideas at podcast@onrecordpr.com.